is silent, save for the rhythmic, near-audible pulse of the clock on the wall, a steady, indifferent tick that marks the passage of time. In the center of this space stands a figure, bathed in the cool, unflattering light of early morning. Before them hangs a mirror, a silvered surface that promises nothing but the cold, hard reflection of things as they are. The figure stands with shoulders slightly rounded, a subtle, habitual slouch born of years spent negotiating with reality. They gaze into their own eyes, the same eyes that have witnessed every missed opportunity, every dwindling bank balance, every quiet, gnawing resentment of a life that feels perpetually stalled. Then, the instruction is given. It is a simple, three-word directive. I am wealth. The air in the room seems to shimmer with the weight of the statement, but the mirror does not shatter. The bank balance does not spontaneously swell. The room does not transform into a palace of gold. Instead, a peculiar, visceral friction begins to manifest. The stomach tightens a familiar, protective contraction. The jaw clenches. The mind, that tireless, cynical architect of logic, immediately rushes to the barricades. It screams a list of evidence. Look at the rent due next week. Look at the stack of unpaid invoices. Look at the years of effort that yielded only crumbs. This is the paradox. The words feel like a lie because they do not match the current scenery. The body, tuned to the frequency of survival, views this new command as a threat to its equilibrium. It is an act of spiritual mutiny. To say I am wealth while standing in the midst of perceived lack is to intentionally disrupt the pattern that has kept one safe, small, and predictable. It is a moment of profound, terrifying beauty, the precise point where the old identity begins to fray, revealing the hidden machinery of the self. Why does the soul recoil at the simplest truths? To understand the resistance to I am wealth, one must look beneath the surface of the conscious mind and into the bedrock of the human psyche. The core principle here is the nature of identity as an assumed position. For most, identity is not a choice. It is a cumulative record of past performances. We have spent lifetimes practicing the role of the struggler, the scarcity bearer, or the conditional receiver. We have reinforced these roles through thousands of small, repetitive actions, apologizing for our space, undercharging for our brilliance, and reflexively rejecting assistance because it feels like an obligation. Why do we do this? We do it because the brain is a prediction machine, and it prefers the certainty of known suffering over the uncertainty of unknown expansion. If one has lived in a state of lack, that lack has become the known. It is a map one knows how to navigate. Wealth, by contrast, is an unexplored territory. It represents a loss of the self that one has spent decades constructing. How, then, does one dismantle this architecture? It requires the recursive practice of identity command. The mind asks, how can I be wealthy when I have nothing? The soul must respond. Wealth is not a calculation of current assets. It is the fundamental quality of the vessel. Philosophically, this is the shift from reactive existence to proactive manifestation. Most of the world operates on a wait-and-see basis. They wait for the outer evidence, the promotion, the sale, the windfall, before they allow themselves to embody the feeling of abundance. But the immutable law of the spirit is that the outer world is merely the reflection, not the source. When one waits for the outside to change, they are confirming that they are a victim of circumstance. When one commands the inner state first, they are acting as the architect of their own reality. The struggle is not about money. The struggle is about the authority of the I am. When a person declares I am wealth, they are not describing their current bank statement. They are installing a new operating system. It is a reclamation of the self from the tyranny of the temporary. In an age long forgotten, there lived a sculptor named Elara. She resided in a village plagued by drought and famine. The villagers spent their days mourning their dry wells and barren fields, their faces etched with the lines of desperation. Elara, however, possessed a peculiar habit. Every morning, before the sun crested the parched hills, she would go to her workshop. It was filled with nothing but dust and jagged, unrefined stone. She would stand before a massive, shapeless boulder, place her hands upon its cold surface, and whisper, "I am the master of the marble." Her peers mocked her. "Look at her," they would whisper. "She has no bread, no water, and no commissions. She talks to stones as if they were already statues." Elara did not argue. She did not explain. She simply understood that if she waited for the rain to soften the stone, she would never have the skill to carve it when the water finally returned. She began to carve. She carved with the intensity of one who was already surrounded by marble masterpieces. She made mistakes, her hands bled, and there were days when the temptation to walk away was overwhelming. But every time the doubt rose, she returned to her mantra. She was not sculpting for the village. She was sculpting for the person she had decided to become. Years later, a great emperor passed through the village. He did not come for the fields or the wells. He came for the statues. He found a village transformed, not because the drought had ended first, but because the sculptor had refused to become the drought. Elara's work had become the magnet that drew the resources of the empire to a place that once had nothing. She had understood the lesson that most fail to grasp. You do not wait for the evidence of the gold to become the artist. You become the artist, and the gold seeks you out. To integrate this truth, one must treat the phrase "I am wealth" not as a prayer for help, but as a standing order for the soul. Begin today. Find a moment of stillness, free from the cacophony of incoming notifications and the urgent demands of the clock. Do not rush. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight of your own presence. Place your hand upon your heart, not as a symbol, but as a way to anchor your attention. Say the words, "I am wealth." Listen to the echo. If the mind protests, do not suppress it. Simply acknowledge the resistance. I hear you, old pattern, but we are moving in a new direction. Your task is to identify one small, honest action that aligns with this new identity. Perhaps it is organizing your desk to reflect a mind of order. Perhaps it is sending an invoice that reflects the true value of your labor. Perhaps it is simply choosing not to apologize for your existence in a conversation. These are the bricks with which you will build your new architecture. The practice is simple, but it is not passive. It is a relentless, quiet commitment to stop rehearsing the story of your own limitation. Yet, even as we plant these seeds, a deeper, more treacherous shadow often arises. For once the mind accepts that it can change its internal landscape, it begins to panic about what it might lose in the process. The path toward wealth is not merely a path of gaining, it is, quite paradoxically, a path of letting go. What is the secret burden that the current you is carrying, the one that must be discarded before the wealthy you can fully emerge? That is the mystery that awaits us in the next chapter. Imagine a traveler walking through a vast, sun-drenched desert. The horizon is shimmering with the promise of an oasis, a shimmering blue expanse that seems to offer reprieve from the relentless heat. Yet, as the traveler draws near, the water recedes, dancing just a few hundred yards ahead. It is a cruel, persistent mirage. For many, this is not merely a desert phenomenon, it is the landscape of their internal lives. They walk with their eyes fixed on a future point, a promotion, a financial milestone, a specific validation, believing that the moment they reach that point, their life will finally begin. They live in a state of perpetual arrival, their spirits suspended in a shimmering, intangible future. The paradox is this: the harder they chase the oasis of abundance, the more they reinforce the reality of their current thirst. By focusing entirely on what is missing, they create a sensory environment of not yet. The body recognizes this state, internalizing the posture of a beggar reaching for a coin that is perpetually pulled back by a string. They have built an invisible wall between themselves and the good they desire, a wall constructed of expectation. They are waiting for the outside world to grant them permission to be wealthy, never realizing that the very act of waiting is what keeps them in the dust. The oasis is not a place you reach. It is the state from which you must begin to walk. To dismantle the anatomy of scarcity, one must first confront the psychological mechanism known as the survival reflex. Why, when given the choice between expansion and comfort, do we instinctively choose the latter? And how does this choice shape our experience of the world? The why lies in the biological imperative for safety. The primitive brain, the amygdala, does not care about prosperity, fulfillment, or self-actualization. It cares only about survival. In its ancient calculus, less is often safer than more. If you have little, you have little to lose. By staying small, you remain beneath the radar of perceived threats. Scarcity, therefore, is not just a financial condition. It is a psychological defense mechanism. It is the ego's way of ensuring that, even if you are not flourishing, you are at least secure from the risks of failure, exposure, or judgment. The how of this process is found in the reinforcement loop of the internal narrative. Every time an opportunity for growth arises, the scarcity-conditioned mind immediately filters it through a lens of potential loss. If I take this leap, I might fail. If I charge what I am worth, I might lose the client. If I claim my abundance, I might be seen as arrogant. We are not just experiencing scarcity, we are practicing it. This is the recursive truth. The more we practice the posture of the needy, the more proficient we become at manifesting lack. We become masters of limitation. To break this, one must ask, what is the price of my safety? When the answer is revealed, a life of quiet, muffled potential, the absurdity of the arrangement becomes clear. We have been trading our birthright of infinite possibility for the meager security of a small, locked room. Deconstructing scarcity requires a radical act of honesty. It demands that we acknowledge that our present limitations are not enforced by the universe, but are sustained by our own subconscious commitment to the safety of being enough to survive, but not enough to thrive. There once existed a merchant in a coastal town who lived in constant, paralyzing fear of the tide. He believed that the ocean was a fickle creature, prone to stealing his goods if he dared to place his stalls too close to the water's edge. Consequently, he set his shop on the highest, driest cliff, far from the bustling port where the true wealth of the world arrived daily in the bellies of trade ships. He spent his years watching the ships pass by, clutching his meager pile of dry, dusty grain. He was safe from the tide, yes, but he was also safe from the harvest. He feared the chaos of the water so much that he forfeited the richness of the flow. One day, an elder from the port climbed the cliff. "Why do you watch the horizon with such bitterness?" the elder asked. "Because the tide takes," the merchant replied. "And I have learned to hold on to what I have." The elder smiled. "The tide does not take, merchant. The tide circulates. It brings what is needed, and it carries away what is finished. You are not holding on to wealth. You are holding on to a cage. You are safe, but you are also starving because you have refused to participate in the rhythm of the sea." The merchant looked down at the harbor, seeing not the danger he had imagined for decades, but a vast, moving interconnectedness. He realized he had been working harder to stay safe than he would have needed to work to stay prosperous. That evening, he began to move his scales and his grain down the path toward the shore. He did not know how to swim in the deep, but he knew he could no longer afford to suffocate on the heights. He chose the risk of the flow over the certainty of the dust. To integrate this lesson is to recognize that your current limits are not your destiny, they are your symptoms. You have spent your life defending a territory that does not actually serve you. Today, the practice is one of deliberate discomfort. Identify one area of your life where you are currently choosing safety over alignment. Perhaps you are avoiding a difficult but necessary conversation, or you are holding back a creative expression because you fear how it might be perceived. Take one step toward the tide. Do not jump into the deep ocean today, but move your station closer to the flow. If you have been hiding, reveal a small piece of your truth. If you have been hoarding your energy, spend a fraction of it on something that brings you joy. As you do this, notice the survival alarm in your chest. Notice the temptation to pull back, to retreat to the cliffside. Do not fight it. Simply observe it as a relic of a past that no longer dictates your future. You are retraining your nervous system to tolerate the expansion that you once feared. However, moving toward the flow is only the first step. Once you reach the water, you will find that the ocean is not just empty space. It is populated by currents of deep-seated beliefs, some inherited from your ancestors, others carved by your own past disappointments that try to dictate your worth. Even when you are ready to receive, your inner landscape may still be cluttered with the debris of old expectations. What happens when the floodgates of your life finally open, and you realize that the biggest barrier to your wealth was never the world outside, but the voice inside that told you you weren't ready? That, dear reader, is the precipice upon which we now stand. The mansion stands upon the highest ridge, a monolith of marble and glass overlooking a valley that seems to stretch into infinity. Inside, the air is perfectly climate-controlled, filtered to a clinical purity. The owner, a man whose name is synonymous with success in the corridors of finance, sits at a desk carved from a single piece of ancient mahogany. Before him, digital screens flicker with the heartbeat of global markets, cascading numbers, ascending graphs, the rhythmic pulse of capital flowing into accounts he will never touch in his lifetime. Yet, despite the opulence, the room is cold. The man's hands, though manicured and steady, grip the arms of his chair with a white-knuckled rigidity. His gaze is not on the beauty of the valley below. It is fixed on a single, red line on a chart, a minor fluctuation that triggers a spike of cortisol in his veins. He is surrounded by the iconography of wealth, yet he lives in a state of absolute psychological bankruptcy. He is anxious, defensive, and perpetually convinced that at any moment the foundation will crumble. He has the currency, but he does not have the wealth. The paradox is stark and unyielding. One can possess a mountain of gold and yet dwell in the deepest poverty of spirit. Conversely, one might walk through a season of rebuilding, possessing little in the way of material assets, yet carry an inner posture of such profound dignity and order that they act as a beacon for prosperity. The man in the mansion is a prisoner of his own hoard. His wealth is a wall that separates him from the very life he intended to buy. He has mistaken the shadow of abundance for the substance of the soul. To deconstruct this phenomenon, we must strip away the common definition of wealth, a mere accumulation of figures, and expose its true, primordial meaning, capacity. Why does the human heart mistake currency for wealth? Because currency is measurable. It provides a sense of external control in a world that is inherently chaotic. The ego loves a scoreboard. It believes that if it can see the number rise, it can prove its value, secure its future, and finally silence the nagging, ancestral voice that whispers, "You are not enough." But this is a recursive trap. The more the ego relies on the external number to define its internal state, the more fragile it becomes. It is a feedback loop of fear. I need more to feel safe. Therefore, I must work harder. But the more I gain, the more I have to lose. How then does one escape this cycle? By redefining wealth as the total capacity of the being. True wealth is not found in the size of the vessel, but in the openness of the channel. It is the capacity to receive without guilt, to create without panic, to make decisions with clarity, and to circulate good without the desperate need to hoard. When one shifts the focus from "how much do I have" to "how much can I conduct," The entire architecture of the self changes. A person with immense financial resources who lives in fear is a closed vessel. They are static, stagnant, and brittle. A person with very little who lives with integrity, openness, and a refusal to define their identity by their temporary circumstances is a flowing river. Wealth, in its most majestic sense, is the grace to be at rest while in motion. It is the ability to maintain internal order regardless of the external conditions. To embody wealth is to realize that you are not a collector of things, but a conduit for the creative energy of the universe. When the channel is open, the currency flows naturally, not as a desperate pursuit, but as a byproduct of a life lived in alignment. In the sprawling empire of Oros, two neighbors lived in conditions that mirrored the duality of human experience. The first, Julian, was a master of commerce. His vaults were filled with gold bars, his granaries overflowed with the harvest of 3 seasons, and his walls were lined with the tapestries of distant lands. Yet, Julian never slept. He employed 10 guards to watch his gates, and he spent his days tracking the shifting winds, terrified that a change in the political climate would diminish his estate. He saw every visitor as a potential thief, every business deal as a potential trap. His wealth was a weight that kept him anchored to a life of perpetual defense. His neighbor, Serafina, lived in a modest home by the river. She had lost her family's legacy in a fire, and was, by all accounts of the villagers, a woman of little means. Yet, Serafina was known throughout the province for her golden hands. Whatever she touched, a garden, a piece of fabric, a conversation seemed to prosper. She gave freely of her time. She hosted travelers with a quiet, regal grace, and she moved through her days with a lightness that defied her circumstances. One year, a great storm devastated the valley. The river rose, the crops failed, and the markets collapsed. Julian, consumed by the need to save his hoard, desperately tried to wall off his estate. He suffered, he shouted, and he ultimately watched his wealth dissipate as he scrambled to protect it. Serafina, meanwhile, simply moved her small table to higher ground. She helped her neighbors organize their own recovery, her quiet order providing a foundation for others to rebuild. When the waters receded, Julian was empty and bitter, a man who had lost his only reason for being. Serafina, however, possessed the same integrity and clarity she had held before the storm. She began to garden again, and within a year, her modest plot was the most vibrant in the land. The wealth had never been in the vaults, it was in the capacity of the vessel. To integrate this truth, you must begin to evaluate your life, not by the balance of your accounts, but by the quality of your internal state. You are not a number, you are an architecture of potential. Before we move further into the mechanics of this transformation, consider where you are currently holding your breath. Where are you acting as a closed vessel, defending what you have instead of circulating what you are? Take a moment to acknowledge the dignity of your own path. If this perspective shifts the way you view your own wealth, consider liking this transmission as a symbolic declaration of your intent to stop being a collector and start being a conductor. Your practice for today is simple. Identify one area where you are operating from a poverty atmosphere, that frantic, protective energy, and replace it with a moment of conscious circulation. Perhaps it is a generous act done without expecting return, or simply a decision made based on clarity rather than fear. You are training your internal landscape to hold the energy of abundance without the need for clutching. As you begin to open these internal channels, you will notice a change in the environment around you. The world begins to respond differently to a person who is no longer a servant of their own fear. But there is a hidden danger in this newfound openness. As the walls of your survival personality come down, you will be confronted by the most persistent obstacle of all, the sacred wobble. It is the moment when the old self realizes it is being dismantled and fights to regain control. What does it feel like when the ghost of your past tries to convince you that your newfound expansion is nothing more than a dangerous illusion. We shall descend into that fire in the next chapter. The moment of transformation is rarely a graceful ascent. It is, more often than not, a chaotic shudder, a profound, visceral disorientation that occurs when the old self begins to lose its grip on the steering wheel of the psyche. Picture a vast, ancient clockwork mechanism that has been ticking with agonizing regularity for decades. The gears are rusted with the calcified habits of survival. The springs are wound tight with the tension of past disappointments. Now, introduce a new, vibrant current of energy, a conscious command of I am wealth, into this rigid system. The result is not immediate harmony. It is a seismic disruption. It is the sacred wobble. The subject sits in the quiet of their room, attempting to hold the posture of abundance. Suddenly, the body rebels. A phantom tightness seizes the chest, a cold sweat pricks the hairline, and the mind is besieged by a cacophony of what-ifs. What if this is a delusion? What if you are merely setting yourself up for a grander collapse? The room, which felt like a sanctuary moments ago, now feels like a cage of exposed nerves. This is the paradoxical truth. The most intense resistance often appears precisely when one is on the precipice of a genuine breakthrough. It is the ego's final, desperate attempt to re-establish the familiarity of the known, even when that known is a state of perpetual lack. The wobble is the sound of the old foundations cracking under the weight of a new truth. To master the sacred wobble, one must first deconstruct the anatomy of resistance. Why does the soul experience growth as a physical threat? And how can one navigate this friction without retreating into the safety of the status quo? The why lies in the biological necessity of homeostasis. The human system is designed to maintain a stable internal state. When the mind introduces a radical new directive, such as the declaration of wealth, it violates the established parameters of the identity envelope. The brain registers this as an error code. It perceives the expansion not as success, but as a systemic shock. The resistance is not a sign of failure. It is a symptom of the system working correctly to preserve its previous boundaries. The how of navigating this requires a shift from binary judgment to observer consciousness. Most people, when they feel the wobble, immediately interpret it as a no from the universe. They assume the discomfort is a warning sign, a signal that they have overstepped their bounds. This is the recursive trap. The interpretation of the resistance becomes the resistance itself. To evolve, one must ask, who is the I that is afraid? By posing this question, the subject separates from the emotional state. They realize that the fear is not them. It is an ancient, automated program reacting to the arrival of light. The sacred wobble is the friction between the identity one has rehearsed for years and the identity one is now claiming. It is the friction of the chrysalis breaking. To stop the wobble is to stop the metamorphosis. One must learn to hold the space of the wobble with calm authority, a state of being that acknowledges the discomfort without granting it the power to dictate the direction. You are the architect, observing the debris of the old structure as you build the new, remaining undisturbed by the dust of the demolition. In the northern port of Halen, there lived a legendary shipwright named Cale. He was known for building vessels that could weather the most violent storms. Yet, for all his skill in building ships for others, Cale lived his life in the harbor of his own past. He had once been a captain of a great trade fleet, but a catastrophic storm had sunken his ships and shattered his ambition. Since that day, he had built only small, sturdy fishing boats that never left the sight of land. One day, a mysterious traveler arrived with a commission, a ship capable of crossing the treacherous boiling sea to reach the Isles of Discovery. Cale accepted the task, but as he began to build, as he shaped the keel and raised the mast, he found himself plagued by the wobble. He would wake in the middle of the night, his heart hammering against his ribs, convinced that the wood was rotting, that the design was flawed, that the sea would surely devour this craft, as it had his others. Cale nearly burned the shipyard down in his panic. He wanted to return to his small fishing boats, where the work was simple and the stakes were invisible. But then, he remembered the words of his mentor. The fear is not the storm. The fear is the ghost of the storm that has already passed. Cale realized that the panic was not a sign that the ship was weak. It was the echo of his own past trauma resurfacing to protect him from the very growth he sought. He did not stop building. He stood in the center of the shipyard, felt the terror rise, breathed through it, and continued to hammer. He allowed the wobble to exist. He worked through the tremors. When the ship was finally launched, it did not sink. It cut through the waves with a grace Cale had never known. The wobble had not been a warning to turn back. It was merely the resistance of the deep water as the ship finally entered its true element. To embody this truth, you must stop treating resistance as a stop sign. Today, when you sit to practice your identity command, expect the wobble. Anticipate the tightness in the chest, the cynical thoughts, the sudden impulse to distract yourself with the trivial. When the wobble hits, perform the threefold release. 1. Notice. Name the sensation. I am feeling resistance. 2. Separate. Remind yourself, this is not my truth. This is my history reacting. 3. Command. With steady, calm authority, repeat your identity. I am wealth. I am willing to learn this identity. I am willing to let go of the protection of my past. Do not argue with the feeling. Do not try to force it away with aggressive positivity. Simply allow it to exist within the vast space of your awareness, like a storm passing over a mountain. The mountain does not move. The storm is temporary. You are beginning to realize that the power of the word is not in its immediate manifestation, but in its ability to reorganize your internal reality. You are no longer a victim of your conditioning. You are the patient architect of your own transformation. However, as the old structures fall and the dust settles, a new challenge emerges. It is one thing to survive the internal storm. It is another to learn the language of the new territory you are entering. The word, as powerful as it is merely a command. What happens when the world begins to demand that you prove your new identity? What happens when you realize that the most potent tool in your arsenal is not just what you say, but how you wield the very language of reality itself? The secret of the wand is waiting, and the next chapter will reveal how to turn your breath into a tool of creation. Imagine a vast, vaulted hall constructed entirely of obsidian mirrors. Within this hall, there are no walls, only reflections, and no sound, only the resonance of your own voice. A person stands in the center and whispers a single, unremarkable phrase. I am always behind. The sound does not simply dissipate. It strikes the obsidian surfaces and reflects back, amplified, layered, and distorted into 1,000 echoing variations. I am always behind, always behind, behind, always behind. The sound waves collide, reinforcing one another until the very atmosphere of the hall vibrates with the truth of the declaration. The person standing there, having merely spoken an observation of their current state, finds themselves trapped in a labyrinth of their own creation. The hall becomes their reality. They walk, breathe, and exist inside the architecture of the echo. This is the hidden state of the human condition. Every I am statement spoken over the years has not evaporated into the ether. They have solidified, forming the crystalline structures of one's identity. A private hall of mirrors that dictates every move, every hesitation, and every failure. To walk into this hall and attempt to move forward is to collide with the very words one has used to define the self. The tragedy is that most believe they are describing a reality that exists outside of themselves, when in fact, they are the ones who built the room. The word is not merely a tool for description. It is the mortar of the prison. To understand the mechanics of the word as wand, one must interrogate the profound relationship between language and neuro-linguistic architecture. Why do we treat our internal vocabulary as a passive observer, and how does this misunderstanding condemn us to a life of perpetual repetition? The why is found in the laziness of the ego. It is far easier to name a feeling than to change the state that produced it. When one says, "I am unlucky," the brain experiences a sense of completion. It has categorized the struggle, placed it in a box, and successfully absolved itself of the need for further inquiry. But in the spiritual and creative sense, this is a fatal error. By defining the self through the lens of a current, temporary struggle, the individual binds their future potential to their past failures. The how of this transformation requires a recursive shift in focus. One must ask, if my words are the blueprint for my reality, what kind of structure am I currently erecting? To change the building, one must change the language of the blueprints. This is not a matter of positive thinking, which is often a superficial veneer covering deep-seated rot. This is a matter of identity command. When the master architect speaks, the building does not ask for permission, the materials align to the instruction. To wield the word as a wand is to recognize that I am is the creative spark of the universe housed within a human vessel. Whatever follows that phrase is not a reflection of the past. It is a command issued to the future. The recursive nature of this is key. You speak the word to align the state, and you hold the state to make the word manifest. If you speak "I am wealth" while identifying with the struggle, the wand is broken. But if you speak "I am wealth" while consciously shifting your internal gravity to match that truth, the word begins to reorganize your neurology, your choices, and eventually, the environment itself. The wand does not create the gold, it creates the magician who can produce it. In the scribal city of Chem, there lived an old man named Haran, who was tasked with copying the royal decrees. Haran was a man of great poverty, his clothes worn thin, and his stomach often empty. For years, he had complained incessantly. As he dipped his quill, he would mutter, "I am a servant of the ink, burdened by the needs of others." His scrolls were filled with mistakes, his handwriting was cramped, and he was perpetually overlooked by the masters. One day, a wandering traveler, a master of the ancient tongue, watched Haran work. The traveler saw not a scribe, but a man who was weaving his own suffering into every word he penned. The traveler leaned in and whispered, "You are writing your own life, Haran, and your ink is made of your complaints." Haran, confused, asked, "What must I do?" The traveler took the scribe's quill and broke it. "You have been using the word to describe your cage. You must now use it to build your door." Haran spent the next year in silence. He stopped muttering his complaints. Instead, every time he dipped his quill, he silently commanded, "I am the scribe of abundance." He wrote his decrees with a new, flowing hand. He stopped focusing on the lack of his station and began to write as if he were already the master of the royal archives. He began to organize his work, to clean his station, and to treat his craft with the dignity of a king. He did not change his circumstances by begging the masters. He changed his identity by controlling his own internal narrative. Within a year, the royal chamberlain, passing by the scribe's station, stopped in his tracks. He saw a man who radiated the stillness and confidence of a master. He did not see a servant. He saw a professional who held the space of prosperity. Haran was promoted, not because his circumstances had shifted first, but because his word had reorganized his identity, and the outer world had finally caught up to the frequency he had installed. To embody the power of the wand, you must become a fierce guardian of your own internal vocabulary. Today, your practice is to audit your I am statements. Every time you notice yourself about to say something that describes a state of limitation, "I am so stressed, I am always broke, I am bad with details," stop. Literally, pause the sentence before you complete it. Replace the ending with a declaration that aligns with the person you are becoming. I am currently learning to manage my flow. I am in a season of building my reserves. I am sharpening my focus. You are not lying to yourself. You are instructing yourself. You are choosing the direction of your internal architecture. As you begin to clean the language of your internal life, you will find that your outer life begins to settle. The frantic, reactive energy that once defined your days will start to transform into a calm, focused power. You are learning to command the atmosphere of your own mind. But there is a catch. As you grow more capable of wielding your word, you will discover that the universe will begin to offer you opportunities, small, quiet, and often disguised as challenges to test your new resolve. You will be asked to receive. The act of receiving is perhaps the most difficult skill for the survivalist to master, for it requires a total surrender of the need to earn or defend. What happens when you are offered the very thing you have been commanding, but it arrives in a form that demands you drop your ego at the door? The mystery of the open hand awaits, and with it, the next phase of your evolution. A banquet hall glitters with the warmth of 1,000 candles, the air thick with the scent of jasmine, and the low hum of genuine connection. A guest, having offered a labor of love to the table, a poem, a project, an act of service, stands at the center of the warmth. Another guest approaches, eyes bright with sincerity, and offers a compliment, a piece of genuine recognition. What happens next is an act of almost instantaneous, reflexive violence. The recipient's eyes dart downward. A nervous laugh escapes their lips. They begin to chatter, frantically building a bridge of excuses. Oh, it was nothing really. I had so much help. It's actually quite flawed if you look closely. They take the gift of recognition and cast it back into the shadows. They have successfully protected themselves from the discomfort of being truly seen. This is the hidden theater of the everyday, the persistent, practiced rejection of good. Most people, while claiming to desire prosperity and abundance, treat these things like incoming projectiles. They are so accustomed to the posture of not enough that the sudden arrival of enough feels like an error in the system. They deflect, they minimize, they argue, and they apologize. The paradox is that one cannot be a master of manifestation if they remain a student of rejection. To ask for more, while refusing what is already being offered, is to stand in the rain with an umbrella, praying to be soaked. Why do we treat the arrival of good as a threat to our internal equilibrium? The answer lies in the deep-seated architecture of the worthiness deficit. Why does the psyche recoil? Because receiving requires a fundamental surrender of the ego's control. To receive is to acknowledge that one is an open vessel, and to be an open vessel is to be vulnerable to the shifting tides of life. Many have spent years constructing an identity based on the hardship of their journey. They wear their struggle like a badge of armor. If they were to simply accept a gift, a compliment, or a sudden opportunity without the prerequisite of earning it, they would feel as though they were betraying the very identity they spent decades honing. They fear that if they stop struggling, they will lose their substance. The how of overcoming this is found in the recursive practice of the muscle of reception. Receiving is not a passive act. It is a rigorous, conscious discipline. Most assume that if they want more, they must do more. But the higher law is that to receive more, one must become more capable of holding. If one's nervous system is calibrated to survive, it will treat luxury, praise, or abundance as an overload that must be purged. To rewire this, one must treat reception as a deliberate encounter. One must ask, why do I feel the need to deflect? The answer is usually a fear that accepting the good creates a debt. This is the great lie of the ego, that all good is a transaction that must be paid for later. True prosperity is not transactional. It is the natural state of a being that has aligned with the flow. By deconstructing the compulsion to deflect, the individual begins to realize that the universe is not asking for payment, it is asking for acknowledgement. To receive is to say yes to the abundance that is already in circulation. In the arid plains of the central provinces, a gardener named Elias lived in a perpetual state of worry. He spent his days hauling buckets of water from a distant, muddy creek to hydrate his wilting plants. His back was perpetually bowed, his hands calloused, and his mind was a storm of calculation. How much water for the beans? How little for the vines? He was a master of rationing. One year, the sky turned a deep, bruised purple. The clouds gathered, heavy and promise-laden. The other farmers in the valley rushed to prepare their cisterns, but Elias began to construct a roof of heavy, thick canvas over his entire garden. He feared the intensity of the downpour. He feared that the volume of water would wash away his topsoil, drown his delicate roots, and create a mess he could not manage. The rain began a torrential, life-giving symphony. The valley drank, the earth swelled with vitality, and the rivers surged. But beneath Elias's canvas, the soil remained dry, cracked, and desperate. When the storm passed and the sun returned with a searing, unforgiving heat, Elias's garden withered. His neighbors, who had opened their fields to the sky, were harvesting an abundance they had never seen before. Elias sat amidst his dying plants, his buckets empty. He realized he had been so busy protecting his garden from the danger of too much that he had rendered it incapable of receiving the very thing it needed to flourish. He had been a master of the struggle, but he was a novice at receiving the gift. From that day forward, Elias tore down his canvas. He learned that the rain did not exist to ruin his soil, it existed to fulfill it. He learned that he did not need to work harder. He needed to be more open. To integrate the art of receiving, you must begin with the micro-reception. You do not need to wait for a windfall to practice this. You can begin with the smallest movements of the daily life. The compliment. The next time someone offers you praise, stop the reflex to deflect. Do not minimize it. Do not return it. Simply look the person in the eye, feel the heat of the discomfort in your chest, and say, "Thank you. I receive that." The help. When someone offers to assist you, even if it is a minor task, pause before you say, "No." Ask yourself if your refusal is based on actual capability or on the fear of feeling obligated. If you can, say, "Thank you. I would appreciate that." The rest. Treat your need for stillness, not as a guilty pause in your labor, but as a valid form of reception. You are receiving the energy of the earth, the restoration of your own system. You are building the muscle of the open hand. You are proving to your nervous system that you are capable of holding goodness without the need for a protective reaction. However, as you become more comfortable receiving, you will notice a change in the environment of your life. The energy that you have been holding, the resources you have been attracting, and the opportunities that are now appearing must go somewhere. Prosperity is not meant to be a static accumulation. It is a river. If you stop the flow, you become a stagnant pool. What happens when the energy you have received begins to demand a new form of expression? How do you circulate the life that has been given to you without falling back into the old patterns of hoarding or panic? The secret of the conscious flow is the next horizon. Imagine a pool nestled in a high, secluded mountain pass. It is fed by a glacial stream, crisp and crystalline, tumbling down from the jagged peaks above. Yet, the pool itself is silent, still, and dark. The water at the center has not moved in months. It has become a glass-like mirror, beautiful to the eye, but beneath the surface, the life is stifled. The silt has settled into a thick, suffocating layer. The oxygen has departed, and the delicate organisms that should thrive in such a place have long since withered. The paradox of the stagnant pond is the paradox of the uncirculated life. The owner of this pool, if one could imagine such a thing, might look at it and see only beauty, a treasure to be guarded. They might build a dam, ensuring that not a single drop escapes, fearing that any loss of volume is a loss of worth. But the moment the dam is completed, the pond begins its slow, quiet death. It is a monument to the fear of loss. Many people treat their resources, their money, their energy, their creativity, and their love with the same instinctual hoarding. They believe that by keeping every drop within their own boundaries, they are securing their prosperity. They do not realize that the very act of withholding creates the atmosphere of the stagnant pool. Wealth, by its nature, is a living, breathing energy. It is not designed to be a hoard. It is designed to be a river. The moment you stop the flow, you transform the gift into a burden. To understand the mechanics of circulation, one must look at the fundamental difference between hoarding and conscious movement. Why does the psyche fear the release of resources? It is because the ego equates having with being. If I hold this money, I am a wealthy person. If I let it go, I am empty. This is the logic of the closed vessel. The ego is obsessed with the preservation of the self and believes that the only way to remain self is to constantly add to its collection. How, then, does one break this attachment without descending into reckless instability? By applying the recursive logic of the conscious circuit. The soul must ask, what is the purpose of this resource? If the purpose is merely to sit in a vault and provide a psychological sense of safety, then it is not wealth, it is a weight. True circulation is the act of directing energy toward its next expression. When you spend money, you are not losing value. You are converting potential energy into kinetic energy. When you give of your time, you are not depleting your stores. You are planting seeds in the garden of your reality. The how of this requires the practice of mindful transaction. Most people move through their financial lives in a state of semi-consciousness, spending with a mix of impulse, guilt, and fear. They spend because they want to feel better, or they hold back because they want to feel safe. Neither state is circulation. True circulation is the act of releasing with intentionality. It is the ability to purchase, to invest, and to gift with a sense of dignity. When you release a resource into the world, you are effectively saying, I trust that this good will return to me in a form that serves my growth. It is a profound declaration of faith. You are not throwing your wealth into the void, you are setting it to work. You are the conductor of a flow, not the jailer of a hoard. In the golden age of the desert caravans, there existed two cities, Oren and Vale. Oren was a city of stone walls and iron gates. Its rulers were obsessed with the accumulation of silver. They taxed every merchant who entered. They seized a portion of every shipment, and they buried the silver in deep, underground vaults beneath the city. They were the wealthiest city in the kingdom, according to the ledgers. But the markets of Oren were silent. The craftsmen had nothing to sell because no one was buying. The city began to decay from the inside out. The streets grew quiet, the fountains ran dry, and the people grew narrow-eyed and suspicious. Vale, on the other hand, was a city of open gates and bustling markets. Its rulers understood the law of the flow. They encouraged their merchants to trade. They incentivized the purchase of new tools, and they made it easy for resources to move through the hands of the people. When a merchant arrived with silk, the citizens bought it to create garments. The craftsmen sold the garments to travelers. The travelers paid with gold, which the city used to improve the irrigation and expand the gardens. A great famine struck the region. Oren, with its vaults full of silver, found itself starving. No one would trade food for metal, and the silver could not be eaten or planted. The city's wealth became its tomb. Vale, meanwhile, survived through the sheer velocity of its circulation. Because they had kept the flow moving, their economy was resilient, their gardens were lush, and their people were connected. The silver in Oren was a stagnant pool. The golden veil was a living river. They learned the timeless truth. Wealth is not what you keep. Wealth is what you can move. To integrate the law of circulation, you must begin to treat your financial and personal outflow as a sacred act. You are no longer just spending or giving. You are activating the flow, the intentional release. The next time you purchase something, be it a necessity, an investment in your growth, or a gift for another, pause for a single heartbeat before the transaction. Say to yourself, or silently in your mind, I release this with trust. I am wealth in circulation. Do this with your bills, your investments, and your contributions. The dignified giving. When you give money or time to a cause or a person, do it without the resentment stain. If you cannot give without feeling drained or bitter, do not give yet. Wait until you can move the resource with dignity. Giving from a place of panic is not circulation. It is a drain. The orderly saving. Save your resources, but do not hoard them from a place of fear. Save for the purpose of future circulation. Let your savings be a reservoir that feeds the river, not a dam that kills it. You are proving to your own mind that you are a participant in a larger reality, one that is not threatened by the movement of resources. You are moving from the psychology of the small hoard to the psychology of the infinite flow. But as you master the art of receiving and the grace of circulating, you will find that a new force begins to stir within you. You have opened the vessel. You have started the river. Now, the world will demand the next step. It will ask for the manifestation of your intention through concrete, physical action. You have prepared your spirit. You have cleared your language. You have opened your hands. Now, the final test is the movement of your feet. What happens when the path forward requires you to stop dreaming and start building? The mystery of aligned action is our next, and perhaps most physical challenge. The sun filters through a clean, tall window, casting long, geometric bars of light across an oak desk. Everything is in its place. A notebook lies open, its pages crisp and expectant. A fine fountain pen rests beside it, its nib reflecting the morning light. The room is a sanctuary of intention, a space designed for the arrival of greatness. And yet, the chair is empty. The person who owns this space is currently pacing in the hallway, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea, their brow furrowed in a cycle of endless internal preparation. They are waiting for the feeling to be right. They are waiting for the cosmic alignment, the perfect sign, or the final piece of the puzzle to snap into place before they sit down and begin the work. They have mastered the philosophy of wealth. They have refined their internal vocabulary. They have opened their hands to receive. And yet, the desk remains empty. The paradox here is the most dangerous of all. One can become so spiritually polished, so psychologically attuned, and so conceptually advanced that they turn their life into a museum of potential, sterile collection of things that never actually happened. They have become addicted to the concept of the shift, while remaining terrified of the labor of the change. They treat their spiritual practice as an alternative to the work, rather than the fuel for it. They are standing at the threshold of the promised land, staring at the vista, convinced that simply admiring the view is the same thing as walking the path. To master the art of aligned action, one must pierce the veil of spiritualized procrastination. Why do we use our internal work as a shield against the vulnerability of outer production? The why is simple. When you are merely thinking, planning, or affirming, you remain in the realm of the perfect potential. In that realm, you cannot fail. You are a masterpiece of intention. But the moment you take an action, the moment you send the proposal, launch the project, or tell the truth, you enter the realm of the actual. The actual is messy. It is subject to feedback, criticism, and the indifferent laws of the world. By staying in the realm of the potential, we protect our ego from the sting of reality. We treat our inner work as a virtuous retreat, when often it is merely a high-minded flight from the responsibility of our own gifts. The how of this transformation requires the recursive practice of the honest step. To bridge the gap between intention and impact, one must ask, is my action a reflection of who I am, or a desperate plea to be validated? When action is born of a need for validation, it is reactive and frantic. When action is born of a firm, inner identity, when you act because you are wealth, not to become wealth, it becomes steady, inevitable, and clear. This is the alchemy of aligned action. It is the refusal to separate the spirit from the hand. If you say, I am wealth, your nervous system must eventually be tasked with a physical errand that supports that claim. If your actions are not aligned with your identity, the identity will eventually be discarded as a hollow affectation. The recursive truth is this: you act to prove your commitment to the identity, and the identity provides the power for the action. They are a single, moving unit. You do not wait to feel like the person who is wealthy. You perform the actions of that person, and the feeling follows. The desk is not a place to wait for inspiration. It is a place where you produce it through the labor of your own hands. In the mountain kingdom of Ethelgard, there lived an architect named Soren. Soren was a man of profound vision. He could close his eyes and see entire cities, bridges that defied gravity, and towers that touched the clouds. He spent his days drawing elaborate sketches and teaching his apprentices the philosophy of structural integrity. He was revered as a master of theory, but Ethelgard was a land that needed repairs. The bridges were crumbling, the dams were leaking, and the city gates were rotting. When the king asked Soren to begin the construction, Soren would pause. He would need more time to study the light. He would need a more refined clay. He would need to consult the stars to ensure the alignment was perfect. He spent years in the sanctuary of his studio, perfecting the designs for bridges that were never built. One day, a young, untrained laborer named Mira walked into the city. She had no blueprints, no philosophy, and no reputation. She looked at the rotting bridge at the city's gate, picked up a hammer, and began to remove the decayed wood. She did not ask for permission. She simply saw that something needed to be moved. Soren watched from his window, aghast at her lack of structural theory. But as Mira worked, she learned. When she hit a snag, she improvised. When the wood was too heavy, she gathered a crew. She was not working for the sake of a theory. She was working for the sake of the bridge. Within weeks, the bridge was stable. Mira had achieved more in a month of imperfect labor than Soren had achieved in a decade of perfect planning. Soren realized, with a heavy heart, that the true master is not the one who knows how the bridge should be built, but the one who is willing to get their hands dirty to build it. He had fallen in love with the idea of the work, while Mira had fallen in love with the reality of it. To integrate the power of aligned action, you must immediately dismantle the museum of your own potential. You are not a collector of intentions, you are an engine of manifestation. The 1-hour rule. Identify the task you have been avoiding, the one that keeps you pacing in the hallway. Do not prepare for it. Do not meditate on it for another hour. Simply perform one honest action for 60 minutes. Do not aim for excellence. Aim for completion. The physical anchor. Clean the physical space where you create. Organize your tools. If you are a writer, clear your screen. If you are a creator, prep your materials. Let the physical environment mirror the order of your new identity. The truth tell. Identify one place in your business or your work where you have been hiding. Maybe you have been undercharging, or failing to communicate, or hiding a project. Take one step. Send the email. Have the conversation. Adjust the price that aligns with the truth of your value. You are training yourself to trust your own output. You are learning that the universe does not reward the beauty of your plans. It rewards the commitment of your actions. This transition from thought to action is where most people falter, and it is where you will now distinguish yourself. If you are ready to stop being a spectator of your own life and start being the creator of it, subscribe to this transmission. By doing so, you are signaling to your own psyche that you are moving from the realm of the observer to the realm of the participant. As you begin to act, you will find that the energy of your life becomes cleaner. The confusion of the what if will be replaced by the clarity of the what is. But as you walk this path of action, you will be faced with a new, subtle, and perhaps more dangerous temptation, the temptation to become hardened by your success. You will have to face the final, majestic challenge of maintaining your integrity in the face of the very abundance you have sought. What does it mean to be wealthy without losing the very heart that makes you human? The secret of clean wealth lies just ahead. In the twilight of a bustling city, a man sits at the edge of a rooftop, looking down at the endless tide of lights below. He has achieved everything the world deems desirable: influence, capital, the ability to bend the circumstances of his life to his own design. Yet, in the silence of the heights, he experiences a phantom coldness. He remembers the days when he struggled, when he sat at a kitchen table with a friend, sharing a simple meal and a shared dream. Back then, there was a warmth to his ambition, a vibrancy, a sense of unity with the world around him. Now, he feels a strange, encroaching armor. He wonders if, in his ascent, he has traded his capacity for connection for the cold efficiency of the summit. This is the paradox of the unexamined rise. The very tools one uses to climb discipline, detachment, a singular focus can, if left unchecked, calcify into a heart of flint. There exists a widespread, haunting fear that to become truly wealthy is to become a stranger to one's own humanity. It is the suspicion that the path to abundance is a path away from the soul, that to sit in the seat of authority is to leave behind the seat of empathy. He looks at his own hands, capable of moving millions, and wonders if they have lost the ability to simply hold, to simply give, to simply be. To pursue clean wealth, one must deconstruct the fallacious architecture of the zero-sum life. Why does the human heart equate success with coldness? And how does one ascend without losing the essential fire of the spirit? The why is found in the cultural inheritance of scarcity. We have been taught that the pie is finite, and therefore, to claim a larger piece, one must necessarily deprive another or harden oneself against the needs of the collective. We fear that if we possess, we will become possessive, that our wealth will possess us, defining our interactions as transactions and our peers as competitors. We mistake the hardening of the ego for the attainment of power. The how of clean wealth relies on the recursive realization that wealth is not an extraction, it is an expansion. When we deconstruct the principle, we find that the fear of becoming cold is actually a fear of loss of agency. We believe that if we become wealthy, our environment will dictate our values. The solution is the installation of core anchors. These are the non-negotiable values: generosity, integrity, presence that must be integrated before the growth accelerates. The recursive nature of this is profound. If you build your identity on the foundation of service and clarity now, the wealth you attract will only amplify those qualities. Wealth is an intensifier, not a transformer. If you are cold and fearful when you have little, you will be cold and fearful when you have much. If you are open and grounded when you have little, you will be a conduit for immense good when you have much. Clean wealth, therefore, is the result of integrity-led growth. It is the ability to look at the facts of the ledger without worshiping them, and the ability to make a plan without becoming a servant to the fear of failure. It is the power to say yes to opportunity and no to corruption, both with the same unwavering human grace. In the northern reaches of Oros, there lived a weaver named Elspeth. She was not merely a textile maker, she was a creator of tapestries that told the stories of her people. As her skill grew, her work became the most sought after in the empire. Gold flowed into her home, her influence expanded, and she was eventually invited to the capital to serve the court. Her friends feared for her. They watched her leave with heavy hearts, whispering, "She will become like the others, haughty, distant, a creature of the court who has forgotten the thread of her own soul." In the capital, Elspeth became immensely wealthy. She was surrounded by advisors who whispered to her of efficiency, who urged her to use cheaper materials, to exploit the labor of the younger weavers, and to hoard her designs so that no one else could rise. They told her, "To stay at the top, you must become harder. You must make the trade." Elspeth listened to them, and then she did something they could not comprehend. She used her wealth not to build walls, but to build schools. She took the extra gold and invested it in the finest fibers, ensuring that the apprentices were paid better than any in the empire. She refused to compromise the quality of her work, and she refused to treat her peers as competitors. She remained the same woman who had woven by the hearth, only now her hearth was the capital, and her influence was the fabric of the kingdom. When the skeptics returned, they expected to find a hardened monarch of the looms. Instead, they found Elspeth sitting at a simple table, her hands calloused by the work, her eyes clear and untroubled. She had achieved great power, but she had never abandoned the why of the weaver. She proved that wealth is not a stain upon the character. It is a canvas upon which the character is magnified. To embody clean wealth, you must stop viewing your prosperity as a threat to your humanity. You are not meant to choose between being good and being successful. You are meant to be a person of such grounded integrity that your success is simply the inevitable result of who you are. The integrity audit. Once a week, look at your primary income-producing activities. Ask, does this activity require me to compromise a value I hold dear? If the answer is yes, begin the work of pivoting that activity until it aligns. Do not wait for the perfect moment. Start the shift now. The power check. Whenever you find yourself in a position of authority in a meeting, in a negotiation, or in a family decision, take one breath to ground yourself. Ensure that your decision is coming from a place of clarity and service, rather than from a place of defense or the need to dominate. The legacy focus. Begin to ask yourself not just how you can earn more, but how the wealth you are creating can bring more order and dignity to those around you. When you focus on creating value for others, you remove the coldness from your own ambition. You are refining your relationship with power. You are learning that you can lead without dominating, and you can flourish without hardening. You are becoming a force for order in a world of chaos. But there is one final, silent truth to realize. Even as you become a master of your word, a conduit of flow, and a creator of value, you must always return to the source. You are not the owner of this flow. You are the vessel. And the vessel is most powerful when it realizes it is part of the ocean. What does it mean to finally rest in the identity of wealth so deeply that the seeking stops and the being begins? The final stage of this transformation, the embodied life, is where the command finally becomes the breath. The storm has passed, not because the world outside has suddenly ceased its chaotic turning, but because the internal barometer has finally stabilized. A figure stands in a garden at twilight. The air is cool, carrying the faint, sweet scent of damp earth and coming rain. The shoulders, once held tight in the rigid armor of protection, have dropped. The jaw, long clenched against the invisible threats of the future, has released. There is a stillness here that is not the stillness of a tomb, but the stillness of a river that has reached the sea. The figure takes a breath, not a shallow, guarded inhalation, but a deep, resonant expansion that fills the entire torso. They look at their hands, calloused from the labor of transformation, and then at the sky, darkening into a rich, velvety indigo. There is no longer a gap between the person they are and the prosperity they embody. The frantic need to prove is gone. The anxious desire to become has dissolved into the simple, radiant fact of being. This is the ultimate paradox of the path. The moment you stop treating wealth as an objective to be pursued, it becomes the atmosphere in which you live. You have moved from the frantic construction of an identity to the quiet, dignified residence of it. The mirror no longer shows a stranger to be convinced. It shows a soul who has remembered its own authority. To arrive at the embodied life is to understand the final recursion of the self. Why is it that the very act of seeking wealth often ensures its distance? And how does the soul finally shift from a state of becoming into a state of remembrance? The why lies in the subtle duality created by the seeker. To seek is to declare that one is currently not what they are pursuing. It is a fundamental affirmation of separation. As long as one looks for prosperity as a destination, they are tethered to the belief that they are currently lacking. It is a loop of perpetual motion that never arrives at the present. The how of this final shift is the practice of identity integration. This is not a mental concept. It is a somatic reality. When you have practiced the word, mastered the flow, and committed to the action, the neurology of your entire system begins to change. You are no longer trying to be wealthy. You are operating from the state of wealth. This is the shift from attraction to radiance. Attraction implies a magnet reaching for metal. It is a movement of desire. Radiance is the state of the sun. It simply is, and all things naturally gravitate to its warmth. To embody this is to realize that the I am command was never about changing your circumstances. It was about stripping away the layers of false identification that prevented your natural state from manifesting. The recursive truth is this: you do not manifest wealth, you manifest yourself. And when you are fully yourself, anchored in the truth of your own abundance, the material world aligns as a natural consequence. You are no longer a person doing these practices. You are the practice itself. You are the command. You are the wand. You are the flow. There was once a king who was known for his immeasurable prosperity. His kingdom was the envy of the world, his influence stretched across the seas, and his name was whispered with awe in every court. Yet, the king lived in a state of profound, unshakable peace. He did not hoard, he did not panic, and he did not scramble to protect his crown. One day, a visiting dignitary asked him, "Great king, how do you manage to govern such vast wealth without losing your soul to the fear of losing it?" The king took off a simple, plain ring he wore on his finger. On the inside, it was inscribed with 3 words, "This, too, passes." "My wealth is not in my coffers," the king explained. "It is not in my crown, and it is not in my kingdom. My wealth is in the understanding that I am the sovereign of my own internal state, and that all outer circumstances are merely temporary guests in the house of my being. When the gold comes, I hold it with grace. When it moves on, I do not chase it. I am not the gold, and I am not the crown. I am the awareness that remains when all else fades." The dignitary left, expecting to learn the secrets of economic strategy. Instead, he had been given the secret of the embodied life. The king was wealthy, not because he had much, but because he was free. He had achieved the ultimate state of prosperity, the ability to exist in total abundance, with an open hand and an untethered heart. To embody this truth is to walk through the world with the quiet confidence of the sovereign. Your wealth is no longer an external pursuit. It is your fundamental nature, the morning remembrance. Each day, before you step into the noise of the world, stand in your own center. Do not ask for anything. Do not demand anything. Simply whisper, "I am wealth," and feel the truth of it in your bones. Let it be the baseline from which you greet the day. The sovereignty check. When a challenge arises, a financial hiccup, an unexpected loss, a moment of uncertainty, do not react. Return to the ring. Remember that this, too, is a temporary guest. You are the house. You are the sovereign. You are the wealth. The unapologetic presence. Walk through your life as if you already belong to the good you desire. Stop shrinking. Stop apologizing. Stop waiting for the validation of the world. You have been validated by the depth of your own work. You have completed the 10-chapter arc of the identity command. You have moved from the mirror of lack to the sovereign of your own soul. The real work is not the struggle to get. The real work is the remembrance of who you are, followed by the courageous, consistent living of that truth. You have been shown the path. You have been given the wand. The bridge is behind you, and the horizon is wide open. If you have chosen to walk this road, if you have claimed your identity, then your life is already, at this very moment, beginning to reorganize itself. Do not look back at the desert of the old you. Look forward, with the calm eyes by task of one who knows the truth. You are not separate from the flow. You are the flow. Go forth, and live not as a seeker, but as a master. The world is waiting for the version of you that refuses to be anything less than who you truly are. I am wealth. That is not just a command for the morning. It is the fundamental signature of your existence. Breathe it in. Let it be the air you walk through. And now, step into the life that has been waiting for your command.